It's creating this moment of us gathering together. When we do the Messy Church thing and painted those tables and kids and families were here and we had hot dogs and stuff, that's what the church does. Yes, we need to keep a building open, lights on, heat on, and we need to buy tables, and we need to get paint, and we need to do stuff. Those practical pieces. But what it does is create that moment, doesn't it? Some people were here on Friday night, we had a movie. Some people were here on Friday night. And again, it creates that opportunity for us to come together and to do something. It creates the opportunity for us to come together and have discussion and be inspired and want to participate in other things. Because it's not just about what happens here, is it? It's how you are inspired to want to do other things like that. When you made a donation to that, what did you do? Well, practically, what you did is you helped send someone to Africa to help build houses for people in Africa, but you did something else. You created a connection between our community and their community by doing that. You created an experience for someone's to come back here and share with us about what that's like. You created the opportunity for someone to be there and come back here and be able to tell you, you know, people in that community, they have almost nothing, and yet they are the happiest people ever. I've forgotten how many times I've heard you say that, Carrie. That's what you do. That's what you do when you put, it's falling apart. And you buy tape to repair the bottom of the... That's what you do. And see, here's an interesting thing. We talked about this at the board meeting a while ago now actually. We talked about this, and one of the things we talked about was wanting to change people's thinking around what their support, both financial and in terms of participation, means to the church. So that you would know that when you participate in doing something at the church, or you financially support the church, you would know, person to thing, what was happening with that. And part of that discussion was around this idea that on Sunday mornings we pass a plate and you put money on it for the church. What if you're not here? What if you're someone who isn't here, but really appreciates what the church does? What if you're somebody who comes to one of those other things that are free? What about those things? What about knowing that when you financially support the church, it supports other things in the community, our work in the community? What is that exactly? When you help plant a community garden, and I mean that metaphorically as well as realistically, what does that do for the community? So we decided to change things up a little bit. So starting at the beginning of November, we're not going to pass a plate on Sunday morning. There'll be a box, a beautiful box, at the lobby in which you can put your Sunday morning offering if you would like. But what we really want you to do is connect with what it is we do, not just that bowl that goes by. Like that. Speaking of bowls. What we want you to do is understand where it goes and connect with where it goes. And so we'll be creating all sorts of opportunities for people to do that. It doesn't mean that at every single thing we're going to do, we're going to actually charge you money to get in or ask you to make a donation necessarily. It doesn't mean that someone's going to come and knock on your door and say, here's a list of things you need to do for the church. Please have these finished by the end of next month. It doesn't mean that at all. What it means is we want everyone to engage what it is we do. And to understand that it's not just about financially supporting an institution that you're not really sure does stuff, but actually knowing what that is. Now we have a relatively small, not just here, but larger community in which to engage people in that. And so we have a couple of other things planned for that. On the back of your bulletin, you've seen the Angels Among Us logo now for 2 weeks. And within the next week or so, you'll see much more about what that actually means. It's about the month of November and reminding everyone that we are all angels in what we do for each other. Because that's what we do, isn't it? And that's what you financially support. That's what you personally support when you participate in either leading or coming to something that happens here or in the community. That's what we're about. So at the beginning of November, we're going to start doing that a little bit differently. And we're going to talk more and engage more in what it means to be church. Not only in here, but out in the community. Today, however, we're going to pass the plate. This is what you support. I mean, where else would you see these guys getting together like that?
Today from the Gospel of Mark, book 10, verses 35 to 45. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord over them, and their high officials exercise their authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many."
Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our hope. Amen. That's obviously not from here. I was going to begin today by saying I always feel really sorry for the disciples, especially in the Gospel of Mark, because whether it's actually happened this way or it's just whoever wrote the Gospel of Mark, the disciples are not smart. They're just like, they seem to be the densest, dimmest people you've ever met in your entire life. And I always feel badly for them. And then I just realized, of course, that I totally missed the offering prayer and went right to the prayer before the scripture reading, just as we were bringing it then. That actually is, by the way, what I think, if that's how you read the Gospel of Mark, you can imagine Jesus doing that on a regular basis. He'll say something to the disciples, they'll say something in response, and he'll go, because that's how they're portrayed, especially in this little stretch we've been hearing the last, last week was Thanksgiving, so we had a different lectionary reading for Thanksgiving, but in the weeks before that, we've been hearing from the Gospel of Mark this little cycle of these 3 episodes. And what happens in each of these episodes is Jesus says something profound about what's about to happen. They're on the way to Jerusalem, and he says something about how he's going to be arrested and crucified, and he will rise again 3 days later. And then the disciples say something completely inappropriate in response. And then Jesus teaches them about what it really means to be a disciple. And there's 3 of these little episodes. This is the 3rd one. What's curious about the lectionary is that passage for today doesn't give you the piece right before it where Jesus says, I'm going to be arrested and killed, and then I will come back 2 or 3 days later. It just goes straight to, here's how dumb the disciples are this week. And it really is kind of a dumb story, because the 2 of them, James and John, they don't even speak out from the group. They snuck away from the rest of the group, and they come to Jesus privately and say, we'd really like to have positions of honor, when the time comes. And lots of people interpret that as they just absolutely didn't get it, what Jesus is trying to teach them. But see, I've always thought they did totally get it. When they say that bit about when you come into your glory, I think what they're basically saying is, oh, okay. We heard you say stuff's going to be really bad for a little while, but then it's going to be good. So when it's good, can we have really good stuff? We want to be rewarded. We want to be near you. Okay? So when the good stuff happens. Which one of you wouldn't want that? I mean, really, basically what the disciples are saying is, we want to be near you. Who wouldn't want that? Maybe they're not so dumb after all. Here's the thing is, though, I've always thought, I've always kind of felt a little bit sorry for the way they're portrayed in the Gospel of Mark. I've always thought, we're the disciples. We're the disciples in all of these stories, because sometimes we just don't get it. Sometimes it takes us 2,000 years to get it. We just don't get it. Sometimes we get it, but I think we kind of go, I don't know that I can actually make a difference or make that happen, so I'm not going to do anything. And then there's what I refer to as the Stephen Colbert moment, which is, we know exactly what Jesus is saying, we just don't want to do it. Do you remember that there was a famous quote from Stephen Colbert a couple of years ago where, in response to the latest thing that the fundamentalists in the States had said about the poor, he said, either we have to be a nation that simply doesn't get what Jesus is teaching, or we have to acknowledge that we're a nation that totally gets what Jesus is teaching, we just don't want to do it. That's the third option here, isn't it? We get what you're teaching, Jesus, we just don't want to do it. And each of these 3 little pieces, these 3 little episodes, brings one of these things forward. And see, I think the one today raises that specter of, do we understand? And we don't want to do it. Do we understand we're not sure that we can? Or do we just not understand? Because Jesus responds to James and John initially by saying, okay, can you drink from the cup I drink from? Have you been baptized like me? In other words, can you do the stuff I do? And they say, yes, we can. And he agrees. They can. They can't exactly do exactly what Jesus can do, but they can sure do all of that stuff he's been teaching. And yes, you can. Nobody expects anyone to literally be Jesus. There is a Jesus. What's desired is to live like Jesus. To find that little bit of Jesus that's in each of us and live that out the way Jesus teaches. To follow Jesus, that's what we call ourselves, right? Followers of Jesus, people of the way. And See, I think sometimes we run into, that's awfully hard, I don't think I can do it. Sometimes I think we also run into, I know exactly what that means, I'm just not going to do it. I think we get it, don't we? We get that Jesus is trying to get us to live a certain way. That's what following Jesus means, to follow the way Jesus lives. You have to see that, because Jesus doesn't just talk, he does it. Right? So we've incorporated in the walk the talk aspect right off the bat. So when it comes to the end, right, and Jesus is saying, love one another as I have loved you, of course we can understand exactly what he means. He doesn't mean just go and tell people stuff. He means do it. So, here we are 2,000 years later, and we're a little bit James and Johnish. We know we can do it. The question is, why aren't we? So, are we not doing it because we're afraid? We're afraid that we can't. That's not even one of ours.
Okay.
Ah, there we go. I was afraid. I was afraid the picture was not supporting my thought. Actually, that one isn't either, really, but still, it's cuter. Fern, how many years was it that you really wanted to do stained glass before you actually thought, I'm going to do that?
Oh, a minimum 10.
So a long time.
Long
You probably, and so was it I didn't have time for that, or was it kind of I'm not really sure I'm going to be any good at it? I don't know.
No, I never thought I was creative enough.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And then to make the time to do it.
Is she creative enough, Molly? Thank you. Raise your hand if you're musical. I want to see every hand in the air, because yes, you are. I'm still not seeing hands. Come on, put them up. Go like this. Go like this. Yeah, the thing is, you are. You didn't even want to do that, did you, really? Just kind of, it's moving. I'm moving. If you'd been here a couple of weeks ago when the kids were watching the movie Home, there's a bit where the little alien guy does that, and his hands are, my hands are in the air, I do not care, I think is what he says. But it's because he's grabbed by the music and he starts moving. He doesn't even know what music is, but he starts moving to it. We are innately musical. You just think you're not. It's like people who say, raise your hand if you can't sing. Now you're afraid because you know I'm going to say, yes you can. Yes you can. It's just that you think it needs to sound a certain way. You think that when you sing, that means everyone ought to go, oh, isn't that lovely? What is that? That is beautiful. Rather than, oh my God, stop. That's why you're afraid. That's why you think I can't sing. How many times do you think you've thought about something and gone, I just wouldn't be any good at that? Who can dance? Raise your hand. You can all dance. Yes, you can. Some of us just choose not to because we realize that the manner in which we're moving causes people to laugh. But again, you've prejudged what you think you're capable of, haven't you? You've already decided. You haven't even tried. Or you might try once or twice and then go, it's just not working for me. And you stop. But maybe it took 3 or 4 times to actually learn how it goes. You all should buy, and this isn't just a sales pitch, but you should all buy tickets for Shrek. But that's not just a sales pitch. I'm telling you, actually what I should tell you is you should come to a rehearsal right now and then come to the show. There's a crowd of people up on stage learning how to dance. Like the dance move, there's a couple of songs that have actual choreography. And there are people doing that who've never done it before. And a couple of times people have kind of gone, maybe I shouldn't be in this number, actually. But then they come back and they do it again. And each time they do it, they not only find that yes, they can, they find that it gets better each time that they do it. Yes, you can. We are able. We are able. And I think that's a key part of this little story that we sometimes miss, because we get to that bit. The real important part is the servant part, right? That we must be servants, because Jesus' example is Jesus came to be servant of all, right? And so the idea of being the servant becomes the primary point of this story. And then we totally miss the fact that yes, you can. Yes, you can. Jesus doesn't say, be subservient. Jesus says, serve. Well, in order to serve, you must be able to do something, right? And how often do we go, I can't do it? Yes, you can. You are able. Now, unless you think that the point of this sermon is solely to remind you that, yes, you can, like I'm Tony Robbins or something. The thing is that yes, you can, for Jesus is always in the context of love. You can love each other. You can love people you don't know. You don't need to be afraid. This is another conversation, I might have mentioned it before, it was another conversation we had at the board one meeting. I started out saying, what do you think, if you were to put Jesus' life work into one little phrase, what would it be? Love one another, that we should care and love and have compassion, that we should do good things, and we should live well, all these things. Don't be afraid was mine. Don't be afraid. How often does Jesus say, don't be afraid? And I bet if you looked up how many times Jesus said, don't be afraid, it's invariably after him saying, yes, you can. Yes, you can. You are able. Don't be afraid. Because that's the other piece that's so important here, is that when Jesus says, go and love one another, how often do we back off because, I don't know, I'm scared. I'm afraid it's not going to work out the way I think it should. Because I've already decided how it should, by the way. Well, maybe if we didn't already decide how it should, we just did, things might be a little bit different. Are they going to work out 100% of the time? No. Probably not. But then, why do we have the expectation that it's going to work 100% of the time? Jesus never had the expectation of perfection from anybody. In fact, another piece of this story that we often overlook is Jesus' response to, may we sit at one at the left and one at the right hand. What's his response? I don't get to decide that. It's not no, by the way. It's, I don't get to decide that. But you're Jesus. Once again reminding us from the humanity of Jesus that we don't get to judge. We don't get to judge who gets to be first. We don't get to judge who gets to sit right next to Jesus in heaven. By the way, it's everybody. But we don't get to judge who gets to sit where in heaven. God does that. We're all there, by the way. But God's the one who gets to decide that. So here's Jesus once again reminding us about judgment. All in the context of this wonderful little story about how, yes, you can, but remember to serve each other. Not give in to each other, but to serve each other. To love, to care for each other. To, and this is the most important part of all, and I think this is the key aspect of what we're trying to do over the next few months. Engagement. Engage each other. Engage each other. You know, there's been a lot of things that have been bugging me about this 2-month election campaign. One of which is the and the constant fighting and stuff. But every so often somebody goes, there's an upside to that. People are getting engaged. Not to get married. They're getting engaged in the process. They're getting engaged in thoughts and ideas and discussions. Yeah, they're fighting, okay, but they're engaged in it, aren't they? And a lot of commentators are saying they've never seen a Canadian election with so much engagement from people of all walks of life, all ages, all different kinds of people. So much engagement. Is it all going wonderfully well? Is there agreement from everyone? No. But that's the practical side, isn't it? When there is engagement and discussion, that means there's a variety of opinions, there's a variety of ideas. That doesn't mean everyone else is wrong and I'm right. It means here's an opportunity for me to be exposed to other ideas. I may still be right, by the way, but I'm being exposed to other ideas. That's engagement. That's awesome. If we put that in the context of what Jesus is always teaching us about loving one another, compassion, grace, serving each other. Yes, you can. Yes, you absolutely can.